please, if you have any questions, save them until the end. Can you guys hear me at the back? All good? Cool, easy, awesome. So my name's Alex. I'm a fourth year mechatronics student. This is
I'm EJ. I'm a third year biomedical engineering student.
Yes, and lo and behold, we're your hosts once again for this WEN Presents. Yeah, we're just gonna kick into it. Anyone need to pee? Please pee now, not in here, but sorry.
Yeah, well, first of all, welcome. It's so good to see you all in person and not through my computer screen. Unfortunately, I will miss the little double monitors, so now you can actually see if I read off my cue cards, unfortunately. But yeah, so this is our second ever WEN Presents. For those who may have not been at the first one, these events are really just kind of to create a community and engage in a more diverse audience and really open the conversation up to everyone on a different topic each month. So obviously that you guys already know, but today's topic is diversity and allies. So I think sometimes it can be a bit easy to overlook the importance of diversity if you feel like you're not really directly impacted by it. But I think you'll be kind of surprised about how much it actually affects you. The word diversity, it's being used a lot, kind of thrown around, but hopefully today we can kind of discuss more about what it really means and the effect that it has on people's lives and their experiences. Also, would love to kind of clear up some, I think, misunderstandings about diversity within our own department, why we have groups such as WEN and Rainbow and SPIES. Yeah, because I do know that there is sometimes a little bit of the sentiment that these groups kind of just give an unfair advantage to, the specific group it's like helping. But I can kind of understand that because I feel like a lot of you are like, oh, but I don't really directly contribute to this imbalance. But I think it's important to remember that it is more of like a background fundamental issue where a certain group of people have built and created these foundations and structures. So it does make it harder for people who don't fit within that group to break in and feel welcomed. So yeah, I think as people, we are often, we tend to feel more comfortable and we're more drawn to people who are similar to us. So people who look like us and act like us. And I'm sure you probably all experienced this. If you've ever been to an event where if you don't know anybody, who are the first people you're most likely to approach? Yeah, and so, I think really I just want to make it clear, for WEN, our end goal, and I'm sure for many of the other groups, is that we're no longer needed anymore. So we'll have achieved our goals if we reach gender equity in engineering and, women feel more comfortable and welcomed in the industry and we're no longer needed. So that's really our goal, not to kind of boost us to an unfair advantage way above guys or anything like that. So unfortunately we're still a bit far away from that. UOA still hasn't reached 30% of females or anyone who identifies as such population, and we actually do have the highest gender ratio in the whole of Australasia. So that kind of just speaks on where that ratio is at in the engineering field right now. Also, I know a couple of people think that WEN just kind of gives out jobs and internships to girls that study engineering, but that really isn't true. Most of the work that we do is to kind of create and offer an environment where girls and females feel comfortable, and also a lot of outreach, so encouraging younger girls to get into STEM and things like that.
Yeah, so the point I really want to touch on as a male is that WEN is a club for everyone. It's not just for women. WEN is more of a diverse community that helps to support women within the engineering profession. You don't just have to be a woman to be part of WEN. This community really needs all of our help, as a diverse group of people. And we'll never create change if we kind of remain separate and don't show that support. And that's what's, stopped us from making change in the past. This is really a conversation that needs to be had by everyone for everyone. So it's really great to see such a diverse bunch of people here today. And not identifying with these groups doesn't, give you permission to not support them. It really is, on you to do that. So people really have for too long assumed that you can't be part of WEN just because you don't identify as a woman. But this is now changing for good. hopefully with the WEN Allies program. So please get involved in that. If you look down at your desk, you should have a flyer and this kind of details what's going on with the WEN Allies program, some of the events that are coming up, as well as our diversity training, which is super awesome. Even if you think you may not need it, it's really good to brush up and kind of figure out what some of your biases may be. And if you don't have one of those, please come and chat to us at the end and we can definitely tell you all about that. Yeah, so as EJ mentioned, this is our second event in the WEN Presents series, the first not Zoom one, which is awesome. So can I just show of hands who actually came to the first one? Right up high, right up high. Awesome. Yeah, cool. So that's really awesome. I hope you guys are enjoying the in-person format a bit better. I think we definitely do. Yeah, it's really awesome. So as EJ mentioned before as well, our second topic is diversity and allyship. This event will kind of run by us having three wonderful speakers that have gladly given up some of their time today to talk to us. We'll talk with them and then you'll be able to ask questions. And we have candies for those of you guys that do ask questions, which is extra incentive as well as getting your question asked. So please remember those and save them for the end. And after that, we'll hear from some of our diversity leaders within the engineering club space here at Auckland Uni. And after that, don't run away because we'll have prizes and games and all that fun stuff. And also pizza, the good kind, hell pizza, not Domino's and pizza and all that stuff. So do stick around or we'll eat it all. Yeah, please.
So some really amazing people have put together a video highlighting some of the experiences. So I'm just gonna let them tell their stories.
We'll get there.
In high school, I was the only girl in my maths and technology classes, and my classmates decided to give me the nickname Dumb Bitch.
When I was in the industry, I was applying for an internal job at the company that I was working at. After the interviews, the hiring manager showed up at my desk. The hiring manager, who was more than twice my age, asked me out on a date. I said no, didn't get the job. Not that I wanted to do it anymore.
Often when we meet people, they are sometimes surprised when I tell them that during engineering, some of them even mentioned that it's surprising for them to see a PI woman majoring in this field.
I was telling my friend once about a job that I was doing and how I was the only girl in my team. I was 30 electrical engineers, and he told me that I was totally the diversity hire.
I remember when I was doing practical work one time, the instructor specifically pulled me and my friend aside and said that we were getting extra help just because we were girls, and that he knew that it would kind of aggravate the guys a little. Which was just not appreciated because, you know, I was bad at it because I was weak, not because I was a girl. And he asked me what I was like, I'm like, I'm still an engineer. And then he was like, whoa, that's such like a manly job, isn't it?
So when I was coming out as trans, most people were really good about it actually. But the response that I got from some people was that I don't believe you. Which to me really just says that I don't trust that you're telling me the truth about how you feel and how you experience the world. And so to hear that from people that I liked and that I trusted was really hard actually, especially when, you know, to this day even they weren't willing to learn or change what they thought for me.
I was asked to wear a short skirt to an important meeting to try and get some data out of the team, which was going to be really valuable for a project that my boss was working on and that I was helping out with. So we head off to the meeting. The head of my team has man flu, no meeting. He left his office door wide open. So I'm on the back a little bit later in the day and steal, borrow programming manual, learn SQL in 2 days. It took me more than a day, but 2 days. learn the database programming language, drop the data. By the end of the week, my boss was stunned, couldn't understand how I got this database with what it needed, then that I was still off step. And it didn't take a short step.
Yeah, so I know it kind of feels weird to clap for something like that, but if, like an appreciation round of applause for those people that actually shared stuff. It's really great to see that some people kind of do realize how stupid it is. You know, it's kind of almost humorous how ridiculous these kind of things are, and it's good that, you know, we can have that kind of conversation. But it is a very real thing that I guess affects quite a few people. And yeah, so feeling brave enough to share that was awesome. But yeah, a lot of the times, like these kind of experiences and events do go unnoticed. I personally know a few of the people in that video, and yeah, I would never have guessed that would have happened to them. Maybe that's ignorance or whatever, but I think actually talking about it really does bring it to light. And you know, everyone may feel like they don't know anyone who's gone through that, but I guarantee you have, and it's just about starting that conversation. Yeah, it is really easy to overlook, and that's why being an ally to your friends in these situations is A, important, and B, a very active job, I think. Yeah, just because you don't know anyone who's experienced it doesn't mean that they haven't. And no one does get it right 100% of the time, you know, being an ally to your friends and these people. But it's about realizing when you are wrong and being able to take criticism and changing your views to see what is obviously, you know, best for the world. I think we can all agree on what that is. Yeah, and so I guess here to be an example of how you can do this and much more, we have our three lovely speakers for today. Angela, Callum, and Danny, if you guys could come up, take a seat.
Get comfortable.
I haven't seen this many people in person in a good 4 months. It's really strange.
So I think to start off, we'd just love to get to know a bit more about you, or I'll just introduce them for you all to know. So Angela is a graduate from UOA, now currently working at Tonkin and Taylor, and goes by the pronouns she, her. She's heavily involved with the diversity and inclusion groups at Tonkin and Taylor, and will be talking to us about her journey and experience with diversity in the industry.
Yeah, that's Angela in there. And then Callum is sitting in the middle. He is the founder of LGBTI Plus in STEM and goes by he, him. Callum has had a massive impact on the STEM industry, as well as people studying across New Zealand, contributing to the development of quite a few of our diversity clubs at the uni here and also across the country and in industry, which is super awesome.
So Danny, she goes by the pronouns she, her, is a practicing structural engineer and project director at Holmes Consulting with 25 years of experience over a multitude of sectors, both in New Zealand and the US. She is here to speak today about her experiences, exploring, discussing, and advancing diversity and inclusion and engagement within the construction industry in the United States. For the last several years, and she was also served on the Executive Board of Directors for Women in Construction Operations, and one of the founding members of the KPFF Los Angeles Women's Network, and is now a core member of the Holmes Diversity and Inclusion Committee. So a very accomplished woman. So if just to start us off, I'll love to get to know Angela a bit more. So if you've been to any of the other WEN events before, you might find her quite familiar. So you've been to many events before. Why is this one quite meaningful to you? How has your experience with diversity really shaped who you are today?
Well, first off, I just want to say thank you all for coming. It's really lovely to be able to speak to all of you today. And I think you just being here shows a commitment to inclusiveness and diversity and to being an ally. I guess as a queer, Chinese, non-binary person, it's very immediately obvious when I enter a space, whether that space has done the work or not to be a diverse and inclusive space. So I think it's quite hard to explain to people who haven't experienced it before. or just somebody who isn't a minority. But I think diverse people often need to expend a lot of energy or effort just to be in a space. So I think that's why allyship is such an awesome idea to me. Like the fact that somebody who doesn't really experience that kind of repression, that they can really do some of that work to just make spaces that much more accessible to a minority person.
Awesome. Yeah, and Callum, for you, I understand that you had quite an impact on the diversity space within STEM, obviously, specifically in New Zealand. Do you want to tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so you're referring to LGBTI plus in STEM. Yeah, so I guess that kind of started when I began my career at Oricon. So I've been at Oricon, which is an engineering consultancy, for just over 2.5 years now. And I remember when I first started there, they didn't have the rainbow tick, and there wasn't a lot of visibility for LGBTI plus people within the engineering industry as a whole, I think. And I kind of started to question that a little bit internally, a few people within Oricon, and they were really open, super accepting, and kind of we started to have this conversation around what would improve visibility for the LGBTI plus community look like in engineering. And then so I kind of went off and did a little bit of my own research as well, and that's where I found that engineering is unfortunately one of the less inclusive STEM industries, which is why groups and events like this are so important, especially things like WEN Allies as well. And so from that, I set up LGBTI plus in STEM, which is like a community networking and support platform for the rainbow community. And the aims of that group is to just try and improve visibility. Is to just try and improve visibility of the rainbow community within the STEM fields as a whole, so not just engineering. And so from that, we've had 2 events now, and I think 4 of the largest engineering consultancies in New Zealand are now either Rainbow Tick accredited or in the process of becoming Rainbow Tick accredited. So that's a really exciting thing, and that just, even though it is something as small as improving visibility, it does make quite a big difference. I think when you can kind of see the LGBTI people, you kind of see someone that you, or people that you identify as, it just makes you feel a lot more comfortable in your place of work. Yeah.
For sure. I do feel like, people are like, what's a small tick gonna do or something like that. But I think that it's hard to realize, but if you look into a room or like a company and you don't see anyone like you, it's actually quite intimidating to try and go in there. I know my sister works at a company. I think she's one of the only Asian people working there. And she did tell me she didn't realize that it was going to be an issue until later on. She's like, I do feel a bit alone a bit. So, you know, working towards that is just a really amazing thing, increasing visibility.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not just about the people's perspectives, so, although that is the main point, you know, about how that person feels, but it also really negatively impacts the business as well. And so that's something that you really need to take a look at as well.
Thank you for that. So I know, Danny, you kind of had a slightly different journey into like getting more involved with the diversity and ally space, which I think will kind of resonate with a lot of the people here. And I think that often discrimination and things like that can be a bit more ingrained and subtle, that you don't really notice it until like much later. So like, could you talk about more like your journey into like working more into like the diversity?
Yeah, so for better or worse, it took me probably 15 years to realize that I was anything other than an engineer. I never thought of myself as a female engineer or anything other than an engineer, not during school and not during, you know, the first good chunk of working. In fact, I actually still don't feel like anything other than an engineer. But there was this moment about 15 years into my career where I was approached by one of the more senior engineers that I was working with, a woman in the organization that I used to work for in California. And she said, hey, a few of the younger women graduate engineers have approached me, and they would like to get together with our most senior women in the organization and just have a chat. And I thought, oh God, here we go. They're going to fly the freedom flag, and we're going to be talking about issues that really aren't issues. And I'm not really even sure what I'm going to be able to share with them, because I've actually never had any of the experiences that I've been really fortunate or blind, I'm not sure which, but I've never had any of the experiences that you heard the women speak about on the video earlier. And so I honestly didn't think I had anything to share. Didn't think there was a conversation to have. So we organized this catch up with, was probably 15 women, which would have been all of the women that were working for this company in our LA office. And we just opened the floor and said, what do you want to hear? What do you want to share? What do you want to talk about? And it cracked open this whole world for me of understanding what it is to be a woman in a male-dominated profession. And it wasn't that it had me grow a chip on my shoulder or establish any kind of a negative view about it. And it wasn't that I thought all of a sudden that we were broken as an industry, globally even, because we're not. But I just started to develop a lot of empathy around this and gain a better understanding about what was happening for different people, because just as men and women are generally speaking different, you know, there are women that are different to other women. And so I had a slightly different point of view to other women in our organization. And that started to shift when I heard their stories and when we started to peel the onion, so to speak, and talk about what was on everybody's mind, where they saw the barriers, where they had experienced frustrations. So I guess I'm a late bloomer in that regard, but yeah, it took a wee while, but I have all of those young women at my former company to thank for opening my eyes to this. That meeting turned into the Women's Network at the organization that I used to work for. And it was, as EJ was saying, you know, these organizations they're really a lot more than just bringing a bunch of sameness together, because actually that's what we're trying to combat. But sometimes you do have to group around people that you're comfortable with and that you have shared experiences and points of views with in order to crack some of those, through some of those barriers. So that was the turning point for me. I felt pretty naive, I'll be honest, when I was having those initial conversations, and pretty unhelpful. But I think we all were just in there learning together, and it was great for me to retrospectively consider how actually it had affected me to be, and was affecting me to be, a woman in this profession, and more to come on that later. But that's sort of, that was my awakening.
Yeah, I don't know if like any of you guys have had, you know, similar awakening, but me personally, I came from a school where there was like 20 of us that came into engineering, half of which were female friends of mine. And yeah, I didn't really kind of believe that there was such a disparity as well. So, and I guess getting here, we kind of had the welcome day thing, and we were actually with the health faculty, of which there are many women. And I was like, oh, see, there's heaps of girls. And they kind of went off one way. I was like, oh, why are they taking the girls off that way? And yeah, and then it was just like, oh, you know, not many girls with us. And so it really was like an awakening for me as well. And I do kind of feel a bit naive as well. Yeah. And so if anyone has, you know, had an awakening like that, or had something similar to Danny, I don't think that's like a bad thing as well. I think it's good that you've had that kind of realization and that you're here today and like are showing that support now, which is super awesome. Yeah, thank you.
I will add that I've come a long way since that meeting, and this has been a pretty significant focus for me. Not that I need to justify D1 here, but it was a huge shift and a really interesting one. And I went from, it was like a 180-degree turn. And again, it's not that I came to consider that we had a problem. I just came to, I think, see something different that I hadn't really looked at before. And that was a really incredible shift in perspective for me that I think has helped me a lot in my personal life and in my professional life. And it's just, you know, changed my point of view.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. This is a question for all of you guys. Maybe it's kind of an obvious question, but I'm sure a few of us also have some ideas about why this may be. But why do you guys personally think that there's this disparity in diverse groups within engineering? Do you want to start off, Angela? Like between yeah.
Yes.
Like,
Well, I think the disparities have a root in history. So not to go into a whole like socio-historical lecture or anything, but yeah, I think traditionally there are jobs that are seen as women's jobs and jobs that are seen as men's jobs, and there are different ideas for what a leader should look like or be. And I guess to talk to the disparity in Pacifica and Māori people in the engineering industry, a long history of kind of injustices that are still going on today. So I think we've got a lot of things that we're still working to dismantle in the industry and just in society in general.
Yeah, cool. I'd have to agree with Angela there, I'd say. It is a kind of historical thing of what jobs would be considered for a man, what jobs would be considered for a woman. And unfortunately, that has kind of followed through to today, where the engineering industry is still very masculine, and that kind of feeds through into, from an LGBTI perspective, a lot of the rainbow community don't kind of feel as if they fit into that masculine mold, so can become quite disassociated from any industry that feels as if it is a bit more masculine than others. Yeah.
I just want to quickly add, like, I know that in like historically engineering was always seen as a more like man's job, but I would also say that maybe like doctors and lawyers like were also seen as a more masculine job, but we do see today that now it's become a lot more equal. Like I definitely think there are almost quite a good ratio in medicine and health and also in law. Why is it just engineering that seems to, do you guys, if you have an opinion on it, obviously I'm not going to chuck you into the deep end, but just curious, like why do you think it's just engineering that still retains that kind of disparity, even though these other fields might
That's a
not?
really good question.
Not to think, but it's all right. Maybe open question for you to sleep on.
I think even in places like medicine and law, even where there are like increasing numbers of women doctors, I think still at a leadership level, it's still mostly men and people who are in the majority. But I don't think it's like I think you're all coming into the industry at a really good time. I think as the world is changing and as you're all coming into the workforce, I think we will begin to see more diverse leaders and a more diverse workforce.
I might just chime in on this. I don't have that answer. I don't know if anybody has that answer, but I think that one thing that is probably influencing the balance within universities is what it looks like out there in the world in the workforce. So I think that tends to pull people into, being interested in certain areas of study and then eventually going through those programs. So what I can speak to is my very strong opinions about why this is happening out in the workplace. So with regard to the lack of a gender balance in leadership roles in professional service organizations like engineering and consulting services, like similar to engineering, in the US anyway, which is where, in case you didn't notice, I'm from, and where most of my experience is, the most senior leadership roles in consulting engineering firms are generally tied to an expectation that you're going to bring in work. So business development is closely linked to partnership. And it turns out that men and women, and when I refer to men and women, please know that I'm referring to tendencies, and I'm generalizing because you need to generalize in order to establish differences and create equality, actually. So in order to create equality, you have to generalize to consider what it is that's holding certain demographics back. So when you look at how men and women are wired, and you look at what the what the most commonly attributed strengths are to business development. So there have been studies around this. I've done some reading around this, and leaders of organizations in the US have been asked that question. What do you think the strongest characteristics are that support a good business development person, a good business development leader? And 70 to 80% of those characteristics strongly align with male identified strengths, whereas only 20 to 30% strongly align with female identified strengths. So that model of what an effective business developer looks like, to the typical American anyway, is, you could say, 80% male. So I think what's happening is, and that's just one example. So I found that to be my roadblock in my career development in the US, was that I wasn't really inclined to want to go after work. It just wasn't my thing. I wanted to nurture the business in other ways and develop people in other ways. And I didn't mind chatting to clients, but I didn't want to have quotas hanging over my head, and I didn't find myself particularly comfortable kind of, banging on doors, so to speak, to try to bring in work. Well, it just wasn't my thing. And I wasn't going to become a partner at the organization where I'd spent the 15 years before I came here until I did more of that, and it just didn't really suit me. But I think what we aren't doing as professionals is we aren't looking at the roles of our leaders and asking the question, does this role suit every demographic that we would like to see filling the role? So we talk a lot about the path, but we don't talk a lot about the destination. So you hear a lot of people say, how can we get more women? How can we get more LGBT? How can we get more of all of these different demographics into our universities, into our workforce, into leadership roles? And people tend to focus on that path, which is great, and I think we should. But what we, I think, are neglecting to do is to focus on the destination and look at the roles and ask ourselves whether they suit all of the different types of people that we need to have a balanced group of leaders in any given organization. A lot of that, I think, just stems from the fact that we take it for granted. It's just de facto. The role is the role. It's not written down anywhere. It's just always been. But if you trace it back, it was probably, at least implicitly, created by middle-aged white men. Please forgive me, any middle-aged white men out there. It's not wrong. It's just the way it is. It's just the way that many of these organizations evolved and were created. But we just don't go back and question it. So whether you consider these roles and what is implicitly expected of them to be de facto, just take it for granted, or even sacred, like you're not going to touch our definition of what an effective leader is, because it's always worked for us. We've always done it that way. We've always asked for these qualities in a leader. But if we aren't looking at that, then it's that whole thing of, if we keep doing things the way we've been doing them, we'll keep getting the same result. And if we aren't willing to look at these sort of sacred spaces within our organization, crack them open and ask those questions, do they suit all of the different people that we'd like to see around the table, then we're not going to get all of those people around the table, no matter what you do about the path. So I think that's a stumbling block. And I don't know how it works in New Zealand if these leadership roles are as closely tied to the expectation for business development. It is not the case at Holmes, which is part of why I'm here. But I think it's probably an international trend to some extent.
Yeah, for sure. I think that ties back into what I was saying, that it's not maybe like you guys right now that are causing issue. It's like the fundamental, like if those roles have been created for men, then like it's going to be harder for women to get into it because it wasn't created for them in the first place. But yeah, no, that was really interesting.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I guess it just reminded me of a talk I had with my boss at my last internship, and he was talking about the graduate program there, and how he doesn't really agree with it, and I was like, oh, like why? I think it probably is not too bad, and he kind of said that they always get the same people, and I was like, oh, but they always get such a diverse range of people, and he's like, yeah, but they're all extroverts. I was like, oh, they're actually sort of like that as well, so there's that kind of disparity too, and I think what he thinks was happening is that all these introverted people weren't kind of applying for these leadership kind of graduate programs, and I guess counting themselves out of that as well. So I think that's also something that's super important. It's like, if you don't think for whatever reason that you fit these kind of roles, it should never restrict you from applying for them as well. And really going for that, because that's something where things are going to change, and you need to give yourself that option to actually get into that and change that for yourself as well. Oh yeah, awesome. Yeah, so I guess I'll go to Callum first on this one, but this is for all of you. What are the impacts, I guess, of an organization or society or community or whatever that, what is the impact of, you know, lack of inclusivity? Like, have you ever felt that? Like, how does that make you feel?
I'm not sure if I've explicitly felt it from an organizational level, but intermittently maybe at a project level you might feel it, or the odd meeting, stuff like that. And from a people's perspective, obviously you've got that feeling of exclusion. I think everyone can kind of relate to that feeling, but if you look at what are the impacts of a non-inclusive organization from a business perspective, I was reading a report recently and it explained how in the UK, I think at the macro level, the UK loses a potential $11 billion a year. And that's just from LGBTI plus employees that are closeted, can't bring their authentic selves to work every day. So as a result of that, they're not as productive as they would normally be. And $11 billion a year, that's huge. I was reading another one. This is quite macro. So India, homophobia costs India $30 billion a year annually. And that's 1.3% of their GDP. And when that happens, naturally they call it a recession, but for some reason, you know, they're not acting on that now, which is really interesting. So from the people's perspective, it's just the right thing to do. Obviously, an organization, a diverse organization is a healthy organization, and when you're not accurately representing the wider community that you serve, you're eventually going to be left behind. Yeah.
Do you guys, Ben and Angela, have any?
Yeah, I guess sometimes that lack of inclusion is explicit, but I think more often than not, it's implicit. It's kind of just that feeling of being in a room and then finding it a little bit harder to speak up. So I guess imagine all of the ideas that we've lost just because people have found it harder to speak up. I guess at the end of the day, we're building and designing things for diverse communities. So we need a diverse workforce to produce diverse solutions for these diverse communities.
Just I think it might be a bit short time. I'll go just to finish off the interview section before we go into Q&A. I'd just like to ask, like, how can we get involved? Like, how can people be allies to diverse groups and women, LGBTI groups, especially in engineering? Do you recommend any like tools or just like small things that might be like a good show of like support?
Sure. Is there anybody here from industry, or are you all uni students? Okay, cool. Yeah. And many of you will be out there soon enough before you know it. A couple of things that I think are good to keep in mind for when you're out there working. One is there's an expression, trying to blank on the name of the author, it'll be so obvious in a moment, but don't leave before you leave, Sheryl Sandberg. So she wrote about that in her book, Lean In. So akin to that, I don't even have my own version of that, but I would say don't kick somebody out the door before they've gotten up out of their seat. So a lot of people take parental leaves, maternity leaves in particular, but also paternity leaves or leaves for other reasons, to care for sick members of their family, just take a mental break. And I think something that we do all too often is that we assume that we know what's best for those people, and we decide what it is they need on their way out. And that tends to have them, I think, feel disconnected from the company that they're working with, and undervalued, and potentially not come back. And I think that might have something to do with why women in particular don't return after maternity leaves to professional service organizations. So trying to, and generally speaking, I think just trying to zoom back out when you're having a conversation with somebody and notice that you've got a different point of view than they have will help with that empathy connection a little bit. Don't assume that you know what somebody needs in order to feel supported or to be able to go off and leave. They might want to stay connected to their projects. They might like to work part-time from home while they're away. And just in general, somebody's point of view, it matters a lot, and it's what makes each of us different. So it's so easy for us to be listening to somebody explain how they feel or tell us what they want or give us an explanation for something that they're working on. And we take that on as if it's their words imposed on our point of view. So if you can try to remember that everybody's points of view are different, and that has to do with their upbringing, their socioeconomic background, their gender identity, their race, their age, all sorts of different things, then I think it makes it easier to actually hear what they're saying, and actually consider what it takes for them to feel at home, in the classroom, in the workplace. So I think what we need for that is just to take a pause. So if there was nothing else to take away from this, count to 10 before you react or even decide that you've just understood what that person has said, and consider how their point of view might be different to yours.
Yeah, so from an LGBTI plus perspective, a good example is at Oricon, we've got these rainbow lanyards that we give out to people once they've attended LGBTI awareness training, which we run. And that's a tiny, how easy is it to throw a lanyard on? It's not really much of an effort at all. But you see those people around the office wearing their rainbow lanyard, and it's such a small effort, but results in quite a significant level of visibility. And that was the entire reason that I set up LGBTI plus in STEM, because I felt like the LGBTI community didn't have that visibility in the first place. So a small effort like that results in a significant amount of visibility is definitely a really good first step. Things like coming to these events, advocating on behalf of minority groups, and one way that you can do that is like correcting language in the workplace, university, and at home. So if you hear something that isn't right to say, things like that, definitely pull that person aside and correct them. That's so gay, things like that, correct that, please. And yeah, there's just so many small things that seem tiny and that wouldn't have much of an impact, but they really do. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways to do that.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of conversation in the media recently about how it's not enough to be not racist anymore. We should be actively trying to be anti-racist if we want to change the status quo. And I think that's the same for lots of different types of oppression. So I guess, it's not just enough to tolerate people who are diverse and different anymore. We need to actively stand up and uplift minority people. We need to empower people. So an easy way to do this, like Kellen said, is to have those difficult conversations with your colleagues and with your friends and with your family. To just, call things out if they don't seem right. And it makes a world of difference, because what you're doing then as an ally is that you're making space for the people who are experiencing that oppression to just be. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you. Before we go and open the floor up to you guys for Q&A, we are going to play a quick game of heads or tails. So everyone stand up.
Great guys.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so I will say a fact, and if you think it's true, you put your hands on your head, and if you think it's false, you put your hands on your hips. and then we'll whistle you down and then give you prizes. So, these unfortunately couldn't find diversity related ones, so just random facts. So, cyclones spin in a clockwise direction in the southern hemisphere. And you think it's true? Cyclones spin in a clockwise direction in the southern hemisphere. So if you think it's true, put your hands to your head
I have no idea, but I don't want to go to the.
You are correct. It is true.
That's so smart.
Goldfish only has a memory of 3 seconds. So goldfish only has a memory of 3 seconds. 3, 2, 1. So it's false. Their memory can last for months. The capital of Libya is Benghazi. The capital of Libya is True. So it's false. Dolly Parton is the godmother of Miley Cyrus. Dolly Parton. Everyone watched Hang On, yeah, so it's true. She is the godmother. Yeah. One more. An octopus has 5 hearts. An octopus has 5 hearts.
I guess if you are still up, don't sit down.
Sorry about that.
Oh yes, so now that we've broken the ice for you all, I hope you all feel very comfortable. Maybe ask some questions. If you need an incentive, we have more chocolate. But if you've thought of anything over the time we've been talking to these guys, please raise your hand. I can come around to the mic if you any questions from anyone.
I think we have one.
Oh, you've got some. Yeah, I'll go with you first.
Managerial roles being built for an average man. Is this why most leader women are described as masculine and worse than a man? And have you ever been described as such?
Did everybody hear that question? The answer is no. I've never been described that way, to my face. But yeah, I do tend to think that's the case. That is either how women end up behaving or being perceived in leadership roles, or that those are the types of women that end up in those roles. I realized, that moment I had 15 years into my career, I realized that the reason it hadn't occurred to me until that point that I was different, or that being a woman in engineering might have been a little different for me, is that I was really good at adapting. I was raised with a lot of empathy. Our family had a bunch of international friends, African-American friends, gay and lesbian friends. I was a tomboy with a short haircut that played in trees, and I got along with everybody really well. And I think, looking back at the first chunk of my career, what I was doing was adapting. So I didn't know it, but I was using my powers of empathy to adapt to what was around me and kind of cloak myself as a male in a way. So while I don't think I've ever been viewed as quite masculine, I definitely have been viewed as one of the guys, and the one who could take the joke, who had the thick skin, who could get on well and go to a baseball game and have a beer, and you know that was all good, and take their cursing and dirty jokes, and that was fine. But I think in a way a little bit unhealthy, or at least it was healthy for me to realize that that's what I was up to, and that I actually hadn't, in your words, brought my full self to work yet. So the answer to your question is that yes, I do think that's why we hear a lot of that we hear a lot of that women in leadership roles either appear to be masculine or take on those traits, or, you know, or in fact, maybe have more of those tendencies. Because again, I think the roles have been out there for a really long time. And so you sort of adapt to fit in it. You know, you see a Bugs Bunny shaped hole in the wall, and you want to fit through it. You got to act like Bugs Bunny to get through it. That was a terrible analogy, but hopefully you know what I mean.
Thank you. Was Stacey? Oh, awesome.
This question is to Angela. I was interested in hearing about your experiences being a non-binary person in the engineering sector, whether you can see much difference between the experience of women and men, or anything particularly to know.
I don't know, I guess I'm not really out as non-binary in the workplace. I think often a lot of kind of women's groups can be quite binary in their nature. So sometimes I guess I find it hard to fit in anywhere, because I go to these women's groups and then everybody's calling each other a lady or a lassie or whatever, and I'm like, I don't know if that applies to me. But yeah, I think there are heaps of allies at work, and I've had 2 occasions where people have asked me for my pronouns, and I was like, that was really touching to me. Yeah, I think just little things like that really make a huge difference.
Oh, I see some more. Awesome.
What's your answer?
This is kind of a question maybe for Carl, but I know a couple of times around work and especially around family, that can be quite hard. I tried to call out homophobia when I saw it, and being not a member of the LGBTIQ plus community, I was shut down and said, you don't speak for give the word for them. And I'm wondering how you would combat that in saying that I'm still an ally, even though I do not directly say that I've experienced that hardships and that minority. What would you say in response to that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think just saying I might not identify with that community or that group, but thanks. I might not identify with that group, but I can still identify and acknowledge inappropriate behavior or language. There's absolutely, that's the entire point of this WEN Allies group, is trying to promote ally groups that can do exactly that. So like, one, good on you for correcting family members and friends. I know I'm still doing the same, especially with family. I think all of us could probably identify with that in some way or another. But no, that's really good. I think the first step is just saying, well, you kind of do speak on behalf of the LGBTI community just by identifying and pointing out inappropriate behavior and language. So I think just saying that is enough. You don't have to be in that group to know what's not okay and what is okay to say. Yeah. And I think a really good piece actually is giving an example of how someone feels when they do. So for example, if it was one of your family members or friends saying, that's so gay, don't be gay, giving an example that no, I might not speak for the community, but I know that the LGBTI plus community doesn't feel good, doesn't feel included, and it's actually associated with negative connotations by saying that. So just giving an examples and just saying you don't have to be in that group to correct that is really good. Yeah.
So, you might not know, but we actually are live streaming this event on Zoom. So we've got some questions from the Zoomers. Is that not it? Okay, anyway, from the people on Zoom, someone's asked, considering the proportion of populations of minorities and how each person is unique and different, how is it even possible to have a high representation of all such groups? Isn't it artificial?
Well, good question, but I think realistically we wouldn't want 10%, 10%, equal across. You would want your organization to represent the community. So it's just about getting an accurate representation within the organization of the community. And we know that at the moment, engineering doesn't have that, STEM overall, but especially engineering. So it's just trying to, I don't know the percentage, so don't ask me afterwards, but it's just about trying to get an organization that you feel is close to representing the wider community. Yeah.
Do you guys have anything else to add?
I guess I would say that a lot of people are afraid of quotas or off put by them. I'm one of them. But you have to set targets and establish goals and what you're after, again, or nothing's ever going to change. So whether you're actually reflective of the exact percentages within your community, or you're aiming for a healthy balance of a representation across demographics for the sake of healthy leadership and a healthy workspace, diversity of thought and ideas, which we've all heard about. Having something out there as a goal is a place to start. So I don't think we're ever going to get perfect alignment, and I personally don't feel like that ought to be the goal, but I would want to see every single person interested in working for Holmes, for example, or studying engineering at Auckland Uni to have that opportunity and to feel like they had a path and a destination at each of those places that suited them, and that they could contribute in their own way once they got into that organization and worked their way up into the leadership levels. So I don't think there is kind of a picture to paint that's going to make Holmes or Oricom or Auckland Uni look exactly like our society. But if we think of it in terms of making sure that everybody out there has an equal opportunity to play that role, then that to me, that's where we start.
Should I do one more from there? No? Any more questions from
A question for Alan or as an advocate for diversity, what were your challenges or struggles in promoting disability?
Sorry, I didn't catch the end.
What were your challenges or struggles in promoting the disability of the rainbow community?
Okay. Yeah, so the initial challenges, I think I was quite lucky in that Oricon is really open-minded, or was really open-minded with those first discussions. So when I first brought it up to our diversity and inclusion manager, she was actually like scarily excited about going for the rainbow tick, and I remember she was super excited and she was like, yep, you'll lead this, you'll get Oricon Pride together, because at the time there wasn't an Oricon Pride established for New Zealand. So her first kind of steps were like, all right, we'll establish an Oricon Pride group for New Zealand, you'll go to the executive leadership team, get funding for the rainbow tick, and from there we'll kind of work it out as we go. But the first kind of challenges and struggles, I think it was probably just working up the courage to make that first step by trying to improve visibility, and kind of just speaking to the diversity and inclusion manager. I know that when I started, I wasn't, not that I was not out, but I didn't openly talk about my partner, you know, what we did over the weekend when you're having that kind of conversation in the kitchen and stuff like that at work. So I think part of me was probably hidden. So the first step was kind of making that move to make the effort to be out all the time and make those first steps. But I think the challenges and struggles would probably differ through organisations, which was why I kind of wanted to set up that LGBTI plus and STEM group, because I know that others in organisations that wouldn't be naturally as inclusive might struggle a little bit more to get a bit of traction around that. So hopefully we can change that. Yeah.
Can I just add to that? I have found that being in New Zealand, that sort of surprisingly to me anyway, Kiwis have been a lot more comfortable with the topic of diversity, and whether it's sexual orientation or gender identity or age, generational, or whatever it is. I have found it a really easy conversation, and I would venture to guess that, I mean, I can speak for myself and for the people at homes, and I would venture to guess it's similar across other businesses in New Zealand. But if you wanted to broach a topic, I would think you'd find people to be incredibly receptive, because most of us want to see change and don't know where to start. We hope we can have a positive influence, and sometimes we sit around a room trying to figure out exactly how to do that. And I would love to hear from more people within my organization about what they want and where they would like to see us focus our energy. So I would say find a conduit for that, whoever you trust. It doesn't have to be the diversity and inclusion lead within your office. It could be somebody from your people and culture team. It could be a colleague that you think is brave enough to go ask the right person, but just, you know, find somebody and tap them on the shoulder and give them your ideas. And I gotta believe they'll be embraced, because honestly, there are a lot of people out there that want to see change and just don't really know what that next move is, or if there would be anybody who would want to do the work to help them, like, you know, like all of you have done, and like it sounds like you'd be really good at it.
Oh yes, that might be all the questions for now, but if you have more, please come chat to these guys. You guys hanging around for pizza? Yeah. Definitely. So come chat to these guys. They're very lovely and approachable. We might hand over to
the diversity meeting. I'm just going to check out Lloyd, because I think you guys are getting hungry. I had a lot. I think that chocolate there.
Yeah. While you guys are getting excited over all this, you might wanna like just step in that curve over there, the Messi. Yeah. Yeah, now we're gonna like move on to like how you can be a student ally and what it means you want. So, before we do that, Lena,
and I'm from Slice, and I'm also a WEN leader.
I shouldn't have needed an knowledge before I introduce myself. I'm Chiaki, and I'm from Rainbow Engineering.
I'm Georgina, and I'm from WEN.
Cool. What type of discrimination have you faced? So you might just wanna like just chuck up some answer over there. So yeah, while you guys are figuring an answer. Yeah. So basically, for me, the type of discrimination that I've been faced is just not only me as being a woman, but me as a woman of color. So, that's great.
That's great.
Good answer. So basically, with me being a woman of color, actually being like some of people that I've come across, they don't like. Oh. They don't like see me like as I'm good enough to be in engineering. So basically, because I'm a woman of color, I'm from the Pacific Island, I'm PI. So basically, it's not only that, but because I'm a woman as well. So being a woman is a different type of discrimination, and also being a woman of color is different as well. So basically, yeah, you just have to be more open-minded, I guess. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Cool. That's mine. Sorry. Yeah. So with the next question, it says, how does someone make you feel included and respected? Matthew, open pie.
The pie is a good one.
Yeah, so basically, based on all these answers, it all comes down to be like making everyone feel included, you know? Just try to like talk to people if they're like alone and stuff. Just talk to them, yeah, listen. Cool.
Cool. All right, so with all of these experiences in mind, we're going to cover a couple of theoretical situations now. Next slide. Cool. All right, so the first one is you are approached by someone who hasn't specified their gender, or maybe you're not really sure what their gender is. How would you ensure that you're being respectful? These are some great, these are all the same answers, which is great. This is excellent. Yeah, exactly. So, it is where you I'm not sure about that answer. The rest of them are very good. So, and you all seem to have the right idea. The best thing in this situation is to just ask. You don't need to know someone's gender to be able to hold a conversation with them. You really just need to know what they would like you to call them, their name and their pronouns. And some people may not feel comfortable with giving their pronouns. So a really good thing to get used to is also giving your own pronouns when you're introducing yourself. By the way, my pronouns again. Yeah, and making them feel like you are listening. So not only are you asking for their pronouns, you're also using those pronouns. It's like if I told you that my name is Chiaki and then you come up to me and say, oh, okay, so I'm going to call you Joe. Well, why did you ask? So yeah, please use the pronouns that someone has told you that they would like you to use. Yeah, right. Next one.
Okay, next one. So your friends are unhappy with people from PI. So for those of you who don't know, PI is Pacific Islands. And Maori backgrounds get taught how to mention tutoring scholarships. How would you respond? I mean, I will agree with that, but to be honest, I would say that they're asking that because they don't understand that us as PI people, we're a minority. So basically, it's like creating a safe space for like PI people to like get together, because like PI people is like a culture people, like culture based. Explain, yeah. So I just basically I had to like explain to them why we have that mentoring and tutoring and scholarship.
Next question is about what the benefit of hiring a diverse range of people is. I think I'll start off by just, this was very much covered in the past presentation, just about how
Good answer.
Great answers. Engineering ultimately creates products that are for society, and if we want the best solutions and we want to identify what the biggest problems in our society are, then we need to have a diverse range of people creating those products and in those meetings making decisions. Yeah, and I think that's,
yeah. Okay, should we move on?
Yeah. And then this question is just selecting, maybe from a personal point of view, what you think is the most important trait when you're an ally.
This is a hard question. It's going to take a little bit longer.
Willingness to learn this as a person.
And I think just on this question, the point is that there's no right answer, and it's about being able to adapt based on the situation. So being able to read the context, read the people that you're with and what's necessary at that time, and sort of being able to do these different things, other than the second to last one, based on based on just like the specific situation. Yeah. Yep. They're all equally valid and equally correct.
Apart from maybe the last two, but yeah.
These are just some examples of things that you may have done already. That's awesome to see that you've already done so much, and I think the thing is you're all here, so it means that you have some sort of interest, which is the most important part, is just recognising that there is a role for everyone to play in the issue of diversity, and that we can all do our part, no matter what groups we may or may not belong to really help ensure that everyone, not only that there's diverse workplaces and diverse academic environments, that also everyone was included within them. Yeah, so you're all already on this.
Good, all right, so now that we've established that you are actually an ally already, which is fantastic, there are lots of different ways that we could be an ally, and we need all of these different kinds of allies. For example, I'm not going to read them all out, I think you can, I'm not a teacher, I'm not going to read them out to you, but for example, I'm actually not a loud kind of ally, which maybe is a little bit surprising because I'm talking to you right now. I'm very vocal about LGBT issues, particularly trans issues, because these are things that affect me directly. But when it comes to being an ally for other groups, I'm fairly quiet. I have a lot of social and situational anxiety. I don't really like to call people out on their behavior when I see it, which is something that I'm working on, but that's okay. I'm the kind of ally that I can talk to my friends about why diversity is important. I can, for example, make sure that I'm not speaking over people in a conversation, especially women, because as a man, I know that that does actually happen. So there are lots of different ways that we can be allies. So next slide. Which type of ally do you think resonates the most with you? Have a think about it. And read it. What about you guys? What kind of allies are you guys?
Supporter?
Very much the same. Supporter.
Alright, so we're all feeling quite equal, that's alright. Maybe they chose the wrong people to do this presentation, but we're having fun. So. Interesting. I wouldn't have expected that engineering is full of introverts. But it seems like that's the way it's going to be. And sometimes you just have to learn how to be a better ally in other ways. I'm working on calling people out on their behavior. Good, all right, I think that's it. Oh yeah, one more thing. What is one thing that you maybe have heard tonight? There are lots of great examples from our speakers earlier. What's one thing that you can take away from this presentation that you will do as an ally? Research is a great one. Don't always expect marginalized people who are going to tell you exactly what the problems are. Do your own research. Call the boys out. And that's honestly sometimes the hardest thing, calling your friends out. You don't want to look stupid in front of your friends. You don't want to look not cool in front of your friends. But actually, calling your friends out is cool. You're going to make it cool. Yeah, nice. All right, well, I think we're all clamoring for pizza now. So we're going to get it. All right, well, I'm going to get it.
Well, what big clap for those guys.